Diplomatic negotiations between the United States and Iran resumed in Geneva in February 2025 regarding Iran's nuclear program. These talks occur against a backdrop of increased U.S. military deployments to the Middle East, Iranian uranium enrichment activities that Western governments describe as approaching weapons-grade levels, and statements from U.S. officials characterizing diplomacy as preferred but not the only available option. The negotiations involve indirect communication through intermediaries rather than direct bilateral meetings. This represents a continuation of diplomatic efforts that have occurred intermittently since the United States withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2018. This analysis examines 8 interconnected elements. First, the diplomatic framework and stated objectives of the Geneva talks. Second, the Trump administration's reported negotiating positions regarding agreement duration and scope. Third, documented changes in U.S. military deployments to the region. Fourth, Iran's stated positions on nuclear technology and sovereignty. Fifth, the military capabilities and defensive systems relevant to potential conflict scenarios. Sixth, regional security responses, including evacuation measures. Seventh, analytical discussion of regime change as a potential outcome. Eighth, the strategic framework articulated by U.S. officials. The Geneva talks were announced through statements from the U.S. State Department and Iranian Foreign Ministry in early February 2025. The format involves indirect negotiations with Oman and Switzerland serving as intermediaries. This structure reflects the absence of formal diplomatic relations between the United States and Iran since 1980. U.S. officials, including Vice President J.D. Vance, have made public statements characterizing the negotiations as potentially the final diplomatic opportunity before other options are considered. Vance stated in a February 10th interview that the administration's position is clear. Iran cannot be permitted to acquire nuclear weapons, and any movement toward weapons development would trigger response. The characterization of these talks as last-ditch or final reflects official rhetoric, but does not necessarily indicate predetermined outcomes. Diplomatic negotiations often involve public positioning designed to create pressure and demonstrate resolve. Whether talks represent genuine final opportunity or tactical framing cannot be definitively determined from public statements alone. The specific topics under negotiation have not been fully disclosed. Based on official statements and media reporting citing unnamed administration sources, discussions reportedly cover uranium enrichment levels, stockpile limits, inspection protocols, missile development restrictions, and agreement duration. According to multiple media reports citing administration officials, the Trump administration is demanding that any new agreement lack sunset provisions. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action contained provisions that expired after specified periods, ranging from 10 to 25 years depending on the restriction. Critics of the JCPOA argued these sunset provisions allowed Iran to eventually develop nuclear weapons legally under the agreement. The demand for indefinite duration creates negotiating complexity. Iran has historically argued that its nuclear program is for peaceful energy purposes, and that permanent restrictions infringe on sovereignty rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The NPT recognizes the right of signatories to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, while prohibiting weapons development. U.S. officials have stated publicly that diplomacy is the preferred approach, but that military options remain available if negotiations fail. This represents standard diplomatic language indicating willingness to use force. The credibility of such statements depends on demonstrated capability and political will to follow through. The negotiating dynamic involves uncertainty on both sides about the other's actual intentions and red lines. Neither party has complete information about the other's decision-making calculus. This uncertainty is a structural feature of international negotiations involving adversarial relationships. U.S. military deployments to the Middle East have increased in February 2025, according to Department of Defense statements. The documented deployments include F-22 Raptor fighter aircraft to locations in the region. The F-22 is an air superiority fighter with advanced stealth capabilities typically deployed for high-threat environments. Defense analysts note that F-22 deployments can serve multiple purposes, including deterrent signaling, preparation for potential operations, protection of regional assets, or routine force rotation. The deployment itself does not definitively indicate imminent military action, but it does demonstrate capability. Media reporting citing defense sources indicates that U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, which operates as the Fifth Fleet headquartered in Bahrain, has reduced personnel to mission-critical staff. This type of personnel reduction has historically occurred during heightened threat periods when force protection becomes priority. Some reporting has compared current posturing to the period before a previous U.S. military operation. Without confirmation from official sources, such comparisons represent analytical speculation rather than verified intelligence. The pattern of deployments may be similar, but similarity does not establish causation or prove intent. Additional U.S. military assets in the region include carrier strike groups, bomber task forces, and ground-based air defense systems. The permanent U.S. military presence in the Middle East includes bases in Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, and other locations hosting thousands of personnel and substantial air assets. The strategic purpose of visible military deployments during negotiations includes demonstrating capability, providing options if diplomacy fails, protecting U.S. personnel and allies, and signaling resolve to adversaries. These purposes can coexist with genuine commitment to diplomatic resolution. Iranian officials have made public statements regarding their position on nuclear negotiations. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that Iran will not abandon what he described as peaceful nuclear technology development. This framing presents Iran's nuclear program as a sovereign right under international law. Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which it ratified in 1970. The NPT allows non-weapon states to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes under International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards. Iran argues its program falls within these permitted activities. International Atomic Energy Agency reports document that Iran has enriched uranium to 60% purity. Weapons-grade uranium is typically enriched to 90% or higher. The technical difficulty of enriching from 60 to 90% is substantially less than enriching from natural uranium to 60%. This proximity to weapons-grade enrichment is a primary concern for the United States and European governments. Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium has grown substantially since the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018 and Iran subsequently reduced compliance with agreement restrictions. IAEA reporting indicates Iran possesses sufficient enriched uranium that, if further enriched, could produce material for multiple weapons. The exact quantity varies by enrichment level, with higher enrichment requiring less total material. The reported U.S. demand that Iran reduce its stockpile to specific levels and curtail missile programs represents maximum negotiating positions. Whether these represent actual requirements for agreement or opening positions subject to negotiation cannot be determined from public statements. Iran has developed substantial ballistic missile capabilities over decades. The missile program serves both conventional military purposes and as potential nuclear delivery system if weapons were developed. Iranian missiles include short-range, medium-range, and extended-range systems capable of reaching targets throughout the Middle East. U.S. military analysts assess that Iran's missile arsenal poses significant threat to U.S. forces in the region, partner nations including Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and Israel. The missiles can carry conventional warheads and could theoretically carry nuclear warheads if developed. U.S. and allied defensive systems deployed in the region include multiple layers. The Patriot missile system provides terminal phase defense against ballistic missiles. The system has been deployed to Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and other locations. Patriot batteries are designed to intercept incoming missiles in their final approach. The SM-3 interceptor operates from U.S. Navy ships and provides mid-course interception capability. The system can engage ballistic missiles during their flight through space before re-entry. Multiple U.S. ships equipped with Aegis combat systems and SM-3 missiles operate in the Persian Gulf and surrounding waters. The Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System provides another layer of missile defense. THAAD batteries have been deployed to various Middle East locations. The system is designed to intercept missiles in terminal phase at higher altitudes than Patriot. Fighter aircraft, including F-35s operating from aircraft carriers, provide air superiority and strike capabilities. The F-35's advanced sensors and stealth characteristics provide substantial capability against advanced air defenses. The effectiveness of these defensive systems depends on multiple factors, including number of incoming missiles, sophistication of missile countermeasures, radar coverage, and coordination between defensive layers. No defensive system provides absolute protection, but the layered approach significantly complicates offensive planning. These systems are positioned for force protection, defending U.S. military assets and personnel. They also provide defense for partner nations under security cooperation agreements. The presence of these systems does not indicate offensive intent, but does demonstrate defensive capability that could enable offensive operations by protecting bases and reducing vulnerability to retaliation. The U.S. State Department issued guidance in early February 2025 authorizing departure of non-emergency U.S. government personnel from Lebanon. This represents elevated security advisory, but not mandatory evacuation. Family members of personnel were also authorized to depart. Lebanon hosts Hezbollah, which maintains close ties with Iran. Hezbollah possesses substantial rocket and missile capabilities developed with Iranian support. Previous conflicts between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006 and periodic exchanges since then demonstrate Hezbollah's capacity to launch large-scale attacks. The State Department guidance cites general security environment rather than specific threat intelligence. Such guidance can serve force protection purposes even absent imminent threat, particularly during periods of regional tension when threat levels could change rapidly. Security analysts note that any U.S.-Iran conflict could trigger Hezbollah involvement either through direct Iranian instruction or independent Hezbollah decision-making. This creates regional escalation risk, where bilateral conflict could expand to involve multiple actors across several countries. Israeli security forces have reportedly increased readiness posture along the northern border with Lebanon. This represents prudent precaution during regional tension rather than indication of specific threat intelligence. The evacuation guidance and military posturing by multiple parties creates potential for miscalculation, where defensive measures are interpreted as offensive preparation, creating action-reaction cycles that increase conflict risk even absent intent by any party to initiate hostilities. The question of regime change as U.S. objective or potential outcome has appeared in analytical discussion. Regime change represents replacement of Iran's current government structure with alternative governance. Historical precedent shows that U.S. administrations have at various times considered or pursued regime change in countries including Iraq, Libya, and Syria. The outcomes of these efforts have varied substantially. Iraq experienced complete regime replacement, followed by prolonged instability. Libya experienced government collapse and ongoing fragmentation. Syria experienced civil war without successful regime replacement. Iran presents different circumstances than these cases. The country has larger population, more developed infrastructure, more cohesive national identity, and more institutionalized government structure. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps represents entrenched power structure with military capability, economic interests, and political influence. Public opinion data from Iran is limited and potentially unreliable given government restrictions on free expression. Surveys that have been conducted suggest diverse views on governance, including support for reform within the existing system, support for fundamental system change, and support for monarchy restoration. The relative strength of these positions and the willingness of populations to actively support change are uncertain. U.S. officials, including President Trump, have made statements emphasizing that negotiated agreement represents preferred outcome. Whether regime change remains an unstated objective or is genuinely not pursued cannot be definitively determined from public statements. Multiple objectives can coexist, including seeking agreement, preparing contingencies for military action, and maintaining pressure that could create internal change. The analytical assessment of regime change likelihood depends on multiple factors, including U.S. political will for extended military engagement, Iranian government resilience, regional actor responses, and international reaction. Historical cases suggest that regime change through external military action requires sustained commitment and typically produces prolonged instability. The strategic framework articulated by U.S. officials emphasizes several elements. First, the categorical position that Iran cannot be permitted to develop nuclear weapons. This position has been consistent across multiple U.S. administrations, though implementation approaches have varied. Second, the preference for diplomatic resolution through negotiated agreement. Officials state this represents the optimal outcome, avoiding costs and risks of military conflict. Third, the demand for comprehensive and permanent restrictions covering both nuclear program and missile development. This represents expansion beyond the JCPOA scope, which focused primarily on nuclear program. Fourth, the explicit statement that military options remain available. This maintains pressure on diplomatic track while preparing capability if negotiations fail. Fifth, the emphasis on enforcement and verification mechanisms. Criticism of the JCPOA included arguments that verification was insufficient and that Iran violated terms. Any new agreement would require addressing these concerns. The underlying strategic calculation involves balancing multiple objectives. Preventing Iranian nuclear weapons development represents stated core interest. This must be balanced against costs of military action, including casualties, regional instability, economic disruption, alliance relationships, and potential failure to achieve lasting results. The decision-making process involves uncertainty about effectiveness of different approaches. Diplomacy may or may not produce sustainable agreement. Military action may or may not prevent nuclear development, or may drive it underground. Containment and deterrence may or may not be sustainable over extended periods. Economic pressure may or may not create sufficient incentive for Iranian concessions. To summarize the core analytical findings, diplomatic negotiations between the United States and Iran are occurring in Geneva through indirect channels with stated objective of preventing Iranian nuclear weapons development. The Trump administration has reportedly demanded indefinite agreement duration and comprehensive restrictions, including missile programs. U.S. military deployments to the region have increased, including F-22 fighters and personnel reductions at naval facilities, suggesting elevated readiness. Iran maintains its nuclear program is peaceful and represents sovereign right under international law, while enrichment activities have reached levels approaching weapons capability. Defensive systems, including Patriot, SM-3, and THAAD, provide layered missile defense for U.S. forces and partners. Regional security measures, including Lebanon departure authorization, indicate elevated threat assessment. Regime change represents analytical scenario discussed in policy debate, but official statements emphasize negotiated agreement as objective. The strategic framework prioritizes preventing nuclear weapons through diplomatic means while maintaining military options. What remains uncertain is whether negotiations will produce agreement acceptable to both parties, whether either side will compromise on core demands, what timeline exists before diplomatic track is considered failed, whether military action would be limited strike or comprehensive campaign, how regional actors would respond to conflict, and whether any military action would achieve lasting prevention of nuclear development. The key variables shaping outcomes include political will on both sides to accept compromise, effectiveness of military pressure in creating negotiating incentive, Iranian assessment of agreement benefits versus sovereignty costs, U.S. domestic political considerations, allied positions, particularly from European and Arab partners, and unforeseen developments that could alter strategic calculations. Analysis continues tracking diplomatic statements, military deployments, IAEA reporting on Iranian nuclear activities, and regional security indicators.